My late wife's family forged her signature to trap me in fake debts, so I exposed their fraud and had them publicly shamed. I never thought my wife's family would become my worst enemies the moment we lowered her coffin into the ground. But grief has a way of revealing people's true nature when money is involved. My name is Nathan Cole, and I'm 36 years old. For the past 12 years, I've worked as a construction engineer, spending my days designing and overseeing the building of bridges and foundations. Structures that are meant to endure for generations, weathering storms and carrying the weight of countless lives. There's something deeply satisfying about creating something permanent in a world where so much feels temporary and fragile. I used to believe that family bonds were built the same way, with care and intention, designed to last through any storm life could throw at them. I thought blood relationships came with an unshakable foundation of loyalty and love that would never crumble, no matter what pressures were applied. How naive I was. Sarah Elizabeth Langley became Sarah Elizabeth Cole on a perfect autumn day 8 years ago, when the leaves were turning gold and the air carried that crisp promise of new beginnings. She was everything I'd never known I was looking for. Brilliant without being condescending, funny without being cruel, ambitious without being selfish. She worked as a pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital downtown, and watching her with those kids taught me what genuine compassion looked like. Sarah had this incredible ability to make everyone around her feel valued and heard, whether it was a scared 5-year-old getting stitches or her cantankerous elderly neighbor who complained about everything but secretly adored her. We built a life together that felt solid and real. We bought a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood where kids rode bikes on sidewalks and neighbors actually knew each other's names. Sarah planted a garden in the backyard, coaxing tomatoes and sunflowers from soil that had been neglected for years. I built her a reading nook by the big window in our bedroom, complete with built-in shelves for her ever-growing collection of mystery novels. We talked about children, about expanding the house, about growing old together on that front porch swing I'd installed on her 29th birthday. Then, last March, our carefully constructed world began to crumble with a phone call that started with the words no one ever wants to hear. "Mrs. Cole, we need you to come in to discuss your test results. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer." The oncologist delivered the news with practiced gentleness, but there's no soft way to tell someone that their body has betrayed them. That the cells meant to sustain life have turned malignant and spread like wildfire through organs that were supposed to function for decades more. The prognosis was brutal in its precision: 6 months, maybe 8 if the treatment went well, maybe 4 if it didn't. Sarah cried for exactly 10 minutes after we got home from that appointment. Then she dried her tears, straightened her shoulders and said, "Okay, what do we need to do?" That was Sarah. Face the storm head on, make a plan, fight with everything she had. And fight she did. For 14 months that felt simultaneously like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The chemotherapy made her violently sick, but she'd still drag herself to work on her good days because those kids need normal faces around here, not just worried adults. The radiation burned her skin and exhausted her bones. But she insisted on maintaining our Friday night movie tradition because cancer doesn't get to steal our rituals. When her beautiful auburn hair started falling out in clumps, she shaved it all off herself, donated what she could to charity, and bought 3 different wigs that she named Glamorous Sarah, Professional Sarah, and Punk Rock Sarah. Depending on her mood during those long, difficult months, Sarah's family stepped up in ways that made me believe in the power of unconditional love. Her older brother Victor, who'd always struck me as somewhat self-absorbed and perpetually stressed about his struggling pawnshop business, transformed into the most devoted brother-in-law I could have imagined. He'd show up at the hospital during Sarah's chemo sessions with coffee that was actually decent, magazines that made her laugh, and stories about the eccentric customers at his shop that could distract her from the 4 drips slowly pushing poison through her veins. Victor would spell me during the long nights when Sarah couldn't sleep, sitting beside her bed and regaling her with childhood memories I'd never heard, like the time they'd built a fort in their grandmother's attic and gotten trapped there for 6 hours, or how Sarah had convinced him to let her cut his hair when he was 12, resulting in a disaster that required professional intervention and months of teasing at school. He seemed genuinely invested in her comfort and recovery, often staying until the nurses kicked him out during shift changes. Margaret and Robert Langley, Sarah's parents, drove the 3 hours from their small upstate town every single weekend, arriving Friday evenings with coolers full of Sarah's favorite homemade soups, and leaving Sunday nights with tearful promises to return the following week. Margaret would spend hours braiding Sarah's remaining hair, or massaging her feet when the neuropathy from chemo made walking painful. Robert, a man of few words under the best of circumstances, would sit quietly beside Sarah's bed reading newspaper articles aloud, or simply holding her hand while she dozed. Their devotion felt genuine and complete. When Sarah had to quit working because the treatments became too demanding, Margaret took over organizing Sarah's medical appointments, creating detailed calendars and medication schedules that kept everything running smoothly. When Sarah became too weak to cook, Robert would spend entire Saturdays preparing meals for the week ahead, carefully portioning everything into containers labeled with heating instructions and encouraging notes. "You're not losing just Sarah," Victor told me the night before she passed, his voice thick with emotion as we stood in the hospital hallway watching our wives, his wife Jennifer had driven down to say goodbye, take turns stroking Sarah's hair. "You're gaining a family that will never abandon you. We're all you have now, Nathan, and you're all we have left of her. She's going to live on through all of us taking care of each other." Those words felt like a lifeline in the ocean of grief that was already pulling me under, even before Sarah actually let go. I'd lost both my parents in a car accident when I was 24, and I had no siblings, no extended family to speak of. The Langleys had become my only connection to something larger than myself, my only hope for maintaining some kind of family structure in a world that was about to become unutterably lonely. Sarah passed away on a Thursday morning in late April, when the dogwood trees outside her hospital window were blooming white and pink, adding a cruel beauty to the most devastating moment of my life. She'd been unconscious for 2 days, breathing with the help of machines, but that morning she squeezed my hand one final time and whispered, "Take care of yourself, Nathan. Promise me you'll be happy." Then she closed her eyes and simply stopped. The funeral was everything Sarah would have wanted, full of flowers and laughter alongside the tears, eulogies that celebrated her life rather than just mourning her death. Victor spoke beautifully about Sarah's generous spirit, her fierce loyalty to the people she loved, and her unwavering belief that families should always take care of each other, no matter what challenges they faced. He talked about how Sarah had always been the glue that held their family together, the one who remembered birthdays and organized holiday gatherings and mediated disputes between relatives who were too stubborn to apologize to each other directly. "Sarah would want us to honor her memory by loving each other the way she loved us," Victor said, looking directly at me from the pulpit. "Unconditionally, generously, and with the understanding that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to be there for each other when it matters most." Margaret sobbed into my shoulder during the graveside service, whispering between tears that I was like a son to her now, that losing Sarah didn't mean losing me, that the Langley family would always have a place for me at their table. Even Robert, who'd always been somewhat formal and distant with me, hugged me tight after we scattered the first handfuls of dirt onto Sarah's coffin, and promised that the Langley family never forgot their own, never abandoned the people who'd loved their daughter for the first month after we buried Sarah. Their support felt like the only thing keeping me functional. Victor would appear at my door 3 or 4 evenings a week with takeout from restaurants Sarah and I used to frequent, staying to eat with me and making sure I didn't just retreat into isolation and despair. Margaret called every other day to check that I was eating properly, sleeping adequately, and not drowning in the endless paperwork that follows death: insurance claims, bank account transfers, medical bill disputes, the 1,000 bureaucratic details that somehow need attention even when you can barely summon the energy to brush your teeth. Robert would show up on Saturday mornings with coffee and an invitation to watch whatever football or baseball game was on television, recreating the weekend tradition that Sarah and I had shared for years. He'd sit in Sarah's chair, offering occasional commentary about the players or the weather, but mostly just providing quiet companionship that didn't require me to perform grief in any particular way or timeline. Their consistent presence felt like a blessing during those early weeks when everything reminded me of Sarah and every room in our house echoed with her absence. I genuinely believed that Sarah's death had forged an unbreakable bond between us, that we'd help each other navigate this new reality and keep her memory alive through our continued connection to each other. Then, exactly 6 weeks after we laid Sarah to rest, Victor showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression I'd never seen before: nervous, almost guilty, like someone preparing to deliver bad news they'd been dreading to share. "Nathan, buddy, we need to talk about something important," he said, settling into Sarah's favorite armchair with a familiarity that had once comforted me but now seemed somehow presumptuous. "It's about some financial matters that Sarah never got around to handling before she passed. Some things she probably didn't want to worry you with while she was fighting so hard to get better." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the early May weather. Sarah had been absolutely meticulous about our finances, obsessively so, actually. Every bill was paid on time. Every account was organized and documented. Every important document was filed alphabetically in our home office with backup copies stored in a fireproof safe. She'd grown up in a family that struggled financially, and as an adult she'd developed an almost compulsive need to know exactly where every dollar came from and where it was going. If there were financial matters I didn't know about, if Sarah had been hiding debts or obligations from me, then either she'd fundamentally changed during her illness in ways I'd completely failed to notice, or something was very, very wrong with the story Victor was about to tell me. "What kind of financial matters?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Victor opened the folder and pulled out several pieces of paper. "Well, it turns out Sarah had borrowed some money from various family members over the years. Small amounts here and there, you know how it is. She probably didn't want to worry you with the details, especially when she got sick." He handed me a handwritten note that looked like Sarah's handwriting. It was dated 2 months before her diagnosis and read, "I, Sarah Langley Cole, acknowledge that I owe my brother Victor Langley the sum of $35,000 for emergency car repairs and medical expenses. I promise to repay this amount as soon as possible. Sarah L. Cole." My hands shook as I read it. Sarah had never mentioned borrowing money from Victor. In fact, she'd always complained that Victor was the one constantly asking family members for loans that he never repaid. "There are a few more," Victor said quietly, pulling out additional papers. "Mom and Dad helped her out when you guys were first married, and there were some medical bills that insurance didn't cover. Nothing huge, but it adds up." The next document claimed Sarah owed their parents $28,000 for wedding expenses and early marriage support. Another showed a $15,000 debt to their cousin Michael for business investment opportunities. By the time Victor finished showing me papers, the total came to nearly $200,000. "This can't be right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah would have told me about this. We shared everything." "I know it's a shock," Victor said, his voice full of fake sympathy. "But you have to understand, Sarah was proud. She didn't want you to know she'd needed help from her family. She kept thinking she'd be able to pay it back before you found out. But where did all this money go? I manage our accounts. I would have seen large deposits or unusual spending." Victor's expression grew more serious. "Nathan, Sarah was sick for over a year. Do you have any idea how expensive alternative treatments are? The supplements, the special diets, the consultations with specialists that insurance wouldn't cover? She was trying everything to stay alive for you, buddy. She didn't want to burden you with the cost." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Could Sarah really have hidden this from me? Had she been suffering not just physically but financially, trying to save her own life while protecting me from the truth? "Look," Victor continued, "we know this is hard. We don't expect you to pay everything back at once. But these debts don't just disappear because Sarah passed away. Legally, they become part of her estate, which means they're your responsibility now." Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure intensified. Margaret called me crying, saying that she and Robert had borrowed against their retirement fund to help Sarah and now couldn't pay their own bills. Michael showed up at my office, demanding to know when he'd see his money back because his own business was failing without it. Even Sarah's younger sister Emma, who lived 3 states away, called to guilt me about a supposed $12,000 loan for emergency dental work. Sarah would be heartbroken to know her debts were causing problems for everyone she loved, Margaret said during one particularly manipulative phone call. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd make sure these obligations were handled properly. It was literally one of her dying wishes, Nathan. The emotional manipulation was overwhelming. Every conversation ended with someone reminding me how much Sarah had loved her family, how she'd want me to do the right thing, how disappointed she'd be if I let her debts destroy the people who'd tried to help her survive. But something felt wrong. Sarah had been many things: generous, loving, determined. but she was never secretive about money. She'd grown up poor and was almost obsessive about financial transparency as an adult. We'd had countless conversations about emergency funds, insurance policies, and what would happen to our assets if one of us died. How could she have hidden nearly $200,000 in debt? I started going through every document in our home office: bank statements, credit reports, insurance papers, medical bills, everything. What I found made my blood run cold. Every medical expense Victor claimed Sarah had hidden from me was actually covered by our excellent insurance policy. The car repairs he mentioned? We'd paid cash for them 2 years ago, and I had the receipts. The wedding expenses their parents supposedly covered? We'd saved for 18 months and paid for everything ourselves, taking pride in not asking family for help. The more I investigated, the more obvious it became that these debts were completely fabricated. But I needed proof that would hold up in court, because I was starting to realize this wasn't just about money. It was about a carefully orchestrated plan to steal Sarah's inheritance. Sarah had inherited $400,000 from her grandmother's estate 3 years before her death. We'd invested most of it conservatively, planning to use it eventually for a house down payment and children's college funds. After her death, that money had become mine, along with her life insurance policy and our joint savings. The Langley family was looking at well over $500,000 that they believed should belong to them, instead of the outsider who'd married into their family. On a cold November morning, I made the phone call that would expose their entire scheme. I contacted James Morrison, the lawyer who'd handled Sarah's grandmother's estate, and had helped us set up our wills 3 years earlier. "Mr. Morrison, this is Nathan Cole, Sarah's husband. I need to ask you about some documents that the family says Sarah signed before her death." "Of course, Nathan. I'm so sorry for your loss. Sarah was a wonderful woman. What documents are you referring to?" I described the various promissory notes and IOUs that Victor had shown me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Nathan," Morrison said carefully, "I was Sarah's lawyer for her estate planning, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that she never mentioned any family debts to me. In fact, when we updated her will 18 months ago, she specifically stated that she had no outstanding obligations to anyone." 18 months ago? But these notes are dated from around that same time. "That's impossible." Sarah came to my office in March of last year to update her beneficiaries and confirm that all her assets would pass to you. She was very clear that she didn't owe money to anyone, and was concerned about protecting you from any future claims against her estate. The room started spinning. "Are you saying she knew someone might try to make false claims?" "Not exactly, but she did mention that some family members had been asking her about her inheritance and making comments about how much money she had. She wanted to make sure everything was legally airtight so you'd be protected. Can you look at these documents? I can email them to you right now." 20 minutes later, Morrison called me back. His voice was grim. "Nathan, these documents are forgeries. Sarah's signature is close, but there are several inconsistencies. More importantly, the legal language is completely wrong. Sarah would never have signed documents with this kind of informal wording, and I would never have let her sign anything without proper notarization and witness signatures. So they're completely fake? Not just fake, they're criminal forgeries. Someone went to significant effort to create these, studying Sarah's handwriting and trying to make them look legitimate. This isn't a misunderstanding or a family dispute, this is fraud." That afternoon, I drove to Victor's pawn shop for the confrontation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and Victor looked up from behind the counter with his usual fake smile. "Nathan, great to see you, buddy. Have you thought any more about those financial matters we discussed?" I pulled out my phone and set it on the counter between us. "Victor, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." His smile faltered slightly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I've been going through all of Sarah's financial records, and I can't find any evidence of the debts you showed me. No bank transfers, no credit card payments, no checks written to family members. Can you help me understand where all this borrowed money went?" Victor's face went through several rapid changes. Surprise, confusion, then a defensive anger I'd seen before when he was caught in lies. "Nathan, just because you can't find the records doesn't mean the debts don't exist. Sarah was careful about keeping some things private. Private from her own husband? The man she shared everything with for 8 years? Look, I don't know what you're implying, but Sarah borrowed money from this family. And now that money needs to be repaid. It's that simple. I pulled out copies of the documents Morrison had reviewed. Victor, I had these examined by Sarah's lawyer. He says they're forgeries. The color drained from Victor's face, but he tried to maintain his composure. That's ridiculous. Why would I forge anything? Sarah was my sister. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. Why would you forge documents to steal money from your dead sister's husband? Victor's mask finally slipped completely. Steal? You're the one who's stealing. You think you deserve all that money just because you married into this family? Sarah would want her money to stay with her blood relatives, not some outsider who barely knew her. Barely knew her? We were married for 8 years. 8 years isn't a lifetime. We're her family. We loved her before you even existed in her life. If you loved her, why are you dishonoring her memory with lies and forgery? Victor slammed his fist on the counter, making several items jump. You don't understand what it's like. I've been struggling to keep this business afloat for years. Mom and Dad are broke. Michael's about to lose his house. Sarah had more money than she could ever spend, and now it's just sitting there while her actual family suffers. So you decided to steal it. I decided to take what should have been ours in the first place. The confession hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Victor realized what he'd just admitted and tried to backtrack. Look, Nathan, maybe we can work something out. I know things got a little out of hand, but we're still family. We can figure out a fair way to split Sarah's inheritance. She would have wanted her family taken care of. Sarah did want her family taken care of. That's why she left everything to me, so I could decide how to honor her memory appropriately. And right now, I'm deciding that forging documents and attempting to defraud me is not the way to honor anyone's memory. What are you saying? I'm saying I've already contacted the police. They'll be here within the hour to discuss charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. Victor's face went from red to white in seconds. You can't be serious. You're going to have your wife's family arrested? I'm going to have criminals arrested. The fact that you're related to Sarah just makes it more disgusting. Over the next 3 months, the case moved through the legal system with surprising speed. Victor had been sloppy in his forgeries, and Morrison's testimony as a handwriting expert made the fraud charges stick easily. When the police searched Victor's pawn shop and home, they found practice sheets where he'd been copying Sarah's signature, draft versions of the fake documents, and even research printouts about inheritance law. But the most damning evidence came from Victor's own desperation. Faced with serious felony charges, he threw his family members under the bus, admitting that Margaret, Robert, and Michael had all been in on the scheme from the beginning. They'd started planning it the moment Sarah's cancer was diagnosed, figuring they had months to perfect their approach before her inevitable death. It was never supposed to hurt anyone, Margaret sobbed during her deposition. We just thought, Sarah's gone, and that money can't bring her back. But it could save our family from financial ruin. We didn't think Nathan would investigate so thoroughly. The irony was that if they'd simply asked me for help, I probably would have given them something. I wasn't heartless, and I knew Sarah had loved her family despite their flaws. But their greed and deception had destroyed any possibility of maintaining a relationship. Victor was sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud and forgery. He lost his pawn shop when legal fees and fines consumed what little equity he had. Margaret and Robert received 2 years of probation and were ordered to pay restitution for their role in the conspiracy. Michael, who had the least involvement, got community service and a permanent criminal record that destroyed his struggling business. The local newspaper picked up the story, and within weeks, everyone in their small hometown knew what the Langley family had tried to do. The social shame was almost worse than the legal consequences. Margaret called me once, 6 months after the sentencing, begging me to issue some kind of public statement that would restore their reputation. People cross the street to avoid us, she cried into the phone. Our neighbors won't speak to us. The pastor asked us to find a different church. Please, Nathan, can't you tell people that this was all a misunderstanding? It wasn't a misunderstanding, Margaret. You tried to steal from me using your dead daughter's forged signature. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a calculated crime. But we're still Sarah's family. She wouldn't want us to suffer like this. Sarah also wouldn't want her family to dishonor her memory by committing fraud in her name. You made your choices, and now you're living with the consequences. That was the last conversation I had with any of them. The legal victory felt hollow at first. I'd protected Sarah's inheritance and exposed the truth, but I'd also lost the last connection I had to my wife's memory. For a while I wondered if fighting back had been worth the loneliness and drama. But as months passed, I realized something important. The people who tried to steal from me weren't really Sarah's family in any meaningful sense. They were strangers who happened to share her DNA but none of her values. The real Sarah, the woman I'd married and loved, would have been horrified by their behavior. I used part of Sarah's inheritance to establish the Sarah Cole Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provides legal assistance to surviving spouses who are being exploited by their deceased partners' families. It turns out that inheritance fraud is more common than most people realize, especially when significant money is involved and family relationships are complicated. Working with other widows and widowers who'd faced similar situations helped me understand that I wasn't alone in this experience. Grief makes people vulnerable, and some individuals will exploit that vulnerability without hesitation. Learning to protect yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. A year after the trial ended, I sold the house Sarah and I had shared and moved to Portland, Oregon, where I knew no one and could start fresh. I kept some of her favorite belongings and photos, but I left behind the guilt and obligation that had nearly cost me everything she'd worked to leave behind. I still miss Sarah every day, but I no longer feel guilty about protecting what she left me. I've learned that honoring someone's memory doesn't mean letting people exploit your grief. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone who's gone is to refuse to let others use their name to justify terrible behavior. The Sarah Cole Foundation has helped 43 families avoid inheritance fraud in the past 2 years. Each case we win feels like a small victory, not just for justice, but for the memory of a woman who believed that family should be about love and support, not greed and manipulation. I never heard from the Langley family again after Margaret's final phone call. I sometimes wonder if they learned anything from their experience, if they ever felt genuine remorse for what they tried to do. But mostly, I don't think about them at all anymore. Sarah used to say that you can tell a lot about people by how they behave when they think no one is watching. Well, grief is like that too. It reveals who people really are when they think vulnerability has made you weak. I'm grateful I learned that lesson before it was too late to fight back. The money Sarah left behind has given me the freedom to build a life that honors her memory in ways that matter, not by letting people walk all over me in her name, but by standing up for others who are facing the same exploitation I faced. I think she would be proud of that choice. And on the days when I doubt myself, when I wonder if I was too harsh or unforgiving, I remember Victor's words. You think you deserve all that money just because you married into this family? That sentence tells you everything you need to know about what they really thought of my marriage to Sarah, and what they thought of me. I deserve that money because Sarah chose to leave it to me. She made that choice when she was healthy, when she was thinking clearly, and when she had every opportunity to change her mind. Protecting her final wishes wasn't selfish, it was love.